Democrats don't care a whit about foreign influence. To get Trump, they used foreign intel who lied that the president was a Russian agent. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today, we're going to be talking about George Stephanopoulos' interview with President Donald Trump that occurred last week. Where the question of foreign influence, foreign sources of information on political opponents was given to Trump. You see, Trump, obviously, since 2016, has been accused of using foreign sources of intelligence against his political opponents. He supposedly had this dossier of information on Hillary Clinton. He was getting all this information from Russia. All these allegations, they center on sources of information that were gathered by the Democratic National Committee and the Hillary Clinton campaign. You see, they hired Christopher Steele, the former British agent. Note, the UK is a foreign country, to gather this information, and it had Russian sources of information. Russia is a foreign country, too, that the Democrats were admittedly using to gather information on President Trump. And so Stephanopoulos wants to know what you do under these circumstances. What if you get foreign information? Will you go to the FBI? And so Trump says, quote, I think maybe you do both. I think you might want to listen. He says, it's, quote, not interference. They have information. I think I'd take it. If I thought there was something wrong, I'd maybe go to the FBI if I thought there was something wrong. So Trump's saying, look, if there's information, you listen to information. If it's something wrong with it, you go to the FBI. And this is a huge controversy now. And Democrats want to say Trump is colluding with foreigners, even though this is a hypothetical question about what hypothetically might happen in the 2020 election. In the meantime, in the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton and the DNC were paying for foreign intelligence on President Trump, this concocted idea that he was a Russian agent. And so we've mentioned Christopher Steele, the Clinton campaign, and the DNC paid Perkins Coie, the law firm who hired Fusion GPS, who tasked Christopher Steele, former British spy, to gather intel on President Trump. And it included all sorts of allegations, namely that he was a bought and paid for agent of the Kremlin. And so you look at the dossier from Steele. It says, quote, Russian regime has been cultivating, supporting, and assisting Trump for at least 5 years. So it had to go back to at least 2011. And then the Kremlin was supposedly feeding intelligence into Trump's inner circle, including on his Democratic and other political rivals, quote. So that's the core of the allegation there. Also, that there was, quote, a well-developed conspiracy of cooperation between Trump and Russian leadership. Paul Manafort and foreign policy advisor Carter Page acted as intermediaries. The WikiLeaks publication of the DNC emails and hack have been done with the, quote, full knowledge and support of Trump and senior members of his campaign team. Also, it alleged that Michael Cohen had traveled to Prague. Kremlin Insider reports Trump lawyer Cohen's secret meeting with Kremlin officials in August of 2016 was held in Prague. Quote, clandestine meeting between presidential candidate Donald Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, and Kremlin representatives in August of 2016. And this was, again, a Kremlin insider. That's who Steele says was making these allegations. And so then you go through the record, and we note the fact that this was the subject of a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act against Carter Page, and therefore the Trump campaign. This gave the FBI access to campaign emails, phone calls, text messages, and other documents. Steele also alleged that the Russians had hacked the DNC, but this was already public information. The Washington Post had reported this in June of 2016, a month before Steele reported it. And all you'd have to do is kind of Google it, and you'd say, oh, yes, the Russians hacked the DNC. It was reported everywhere. Steele wasn't revealing the truth of anything insofar as we already knew that the Russians were accused of hacking the DNC by the DNC. And so there was but this all led to Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrants. And then when you look at the Mueller report, this is the report by special counsel Robert Mueller. He looked at the issue of whether or not the Trump campaign, Trump himself, were Russian agents. And in fact, quite dubious. They didn't find anything when they looked at this. They had access to everything that the campaign was saying at the time, all their emails, again, their phone calls. but the Mueller report says, quote, in particular, the office did not find evidence likely to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that campaign officials such as Paul Manafort, George Papadopoulos, and Carter Page acted as agents of the Russian government or at its direction, control, or request during the relevant time period. So Manafort was eventually brought up on unrelated tax and bank fraud charges. Michael Cohen had his own set of legal problems, but not being a Russian agent. Per the Mueller report, quote, Cohen had never traveled to Prague. Again, Cohen had never traveled to Prague. Therefore, and this is according to Bob Mueller, if that's true, then he couldn't have been in Prague meeting with Russian agents, whatever Steele was saying about that, that was concocted. That just didn't happen. So you had a whole stream of intelligence from foreigners, supposedly from Kremlin insiders and former British spies that the Democrats were using to get dirt on Donald Trump, and it was false. You had false information. This is obviously not a good situation. So and you can look at who Steele said his sources were for this dossier. It was source A was a former top Russian intelligence officer. Source B was a senior Russian foreign ministry figure. Source C was a senior Russian financial official. Source E was an ethnic Russian close associate of Trump. Source F was a staffer at the hotel where supposedly Trump was hooking up with prostitutes, which I guess is false too. And then source G was a senior Kremlin official. So you have these foreign sources of information. The Democrats pay for it. And that's the situation there. But it turns out, if you go to the Mueller report, that this wasn't true. The Trump campaign was not coordinating with Russia. It just was not true. It also stated that, quote, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. By the way, that includes the hack. And, quote, the evidence does not establish that the president was involved in an underlying crime related to Russian election interference. So that didn't happen either. And you have a lot of foreign intelligence that's used in this case. George Papadopoulos, he's alleged that at the urging of the FBI, he says that he was encouraged to meet Joseph Mifsud in Rome in March of 2016. Well, here's the thing. If George Papadopoulos is meeting with this Maltese professor, by the way, Malta is a foreign country too, in Rome, that's in Italy, that's a foreign country too, was set up by the FBI, or he was encouraged to meet Mifsud by the FBI, and they were targeting Papadopoulos, but supposedly the investigation into the Trump campaign doesn't begin until July of 2016. Well, they're targeting him in March of 2016, so that's months before. You have a situation where he's meeting with Alexander Downer, an Australian diplomat, talking about this meeting with Mifsud, which occurred in May of 2016. So that means that the FBI would have been targeting Papadopoulos before he talked to Downer, which means the investigation started before July 2016. And then so he alleges that the Mifsud was not linked to Russian intelligence, but Western intelligence. It's very clear Mifsud had very close connections, or was at least walking in British circles. Here he is pictured with Boris Johnson. How do you get that kind of access if you're this big Russian spy? So maybe he was working for Western intelligence agencies. That makes sense. But it means that Papadopoulos was not a Russian agent. And Mueller says as much, again, that the George Papadopoulos did not act as an agent of Russia. They can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. They can't prove it at all. They would have brought that case if they could have. And now we know that the Democrats and the federal government, the Obama administration, was relying on foreign sources of information about President Trump, not just from British spy Christopher Steele and his supposed Russian sources, if they were even Russian sources. That the jury's still out on that, I guess. But National Review's Andrew McCarthy, he reports that the Democrats are hypocritical on foreign interference, and that, quote, in 2016, Estonia did call President Obama's administration to provide opposition research, specifically to convey unverified intelligence that Russia might be channeling money into the Trump campaign. The Brits provided information too, so did the Aussies. So, according to former CIA Director John Brennan, did a number of European governments. Those are foreign countries, by the way. Anyway, back to McCarthy. Quote, to be sure, these countries are our allies, but that hardly means that they were concerned only with our well-being. Like Brennan, they had their own anti-Trump agendas. Europeans in particular didn't like Trump's foreign policy agenda. He wanted to get a better relationship with Russia. Not one little bit. Next thing you knew, this is McCarthy, quote, there were streams of anti-Trump intelligence being channeled into the CIA, none of which, it turns out, established a Trump-Russia collusion conspiracy. And so Democrats, they're obviously upset that the information didn't turn out to be correct. And they're really angry that Attorney General William Barr is looking at this, quote, unprecedented intelligence abuse against the Trump campaign and says, quote, a serious red line has been crossed. This was in an interview with CBS News. Barr said, quote, I think this just has to be looked at carefully because the use of foreign intelligence capabilities and counterintelligence capabilities against an American political campaign, to me, is unprecedented. And it's a serious red line that's been crossed. That's William Barr. He's the Attorney General. He's doing his job. He's doing a good job. And we need to get to the bottom of these foreign sources of intelligence that were being fed into the Clinton campaign, these Steele dossier allegations, but also this information that was coming from Estonia and the UK and Australia and a number of other European governments. We need to find out about that because they were setting up President Trump. They were trying to make him out to look like a Russian agent when he wasn't, in fact, a Russian agent. And that's the Mueller report. That's what the bottom line was. President Trump was not in cahoots with Russia. His campaign was not in cahoots with Russia. That was the bottom line on the collusion aspect of it. Debate what you will about obstruction. On the core allegations against President Trump, he was innocent. His campaign was innocent. Carter Page was innocent. He had the government spying on him for fictitious allegations. He was supposedly hooking up with Igor Sechin to be offered a 19% stake in Rosneft, Russia's oil state company. But there was no such meeting with Sechin in the Mueller report by Page. So there was a number of allegations made that were false, and we need to get to the bottom of that. President Trump is being accused of using foreign sources, but he didn't use foreign sources of information. He's hypothetically answering a question about what you would do under those circumstances. And Democrats are not to be taken seriously about this. What did the Democrats do when they got foreign information from the UK and supposedly from Russian sources? Did they notify the FBI and said, you need to look at Christopher Steele and these Russian sources? No, they said, use this information, weaponize this information, go after President Trump, conduct an investigation against him. And we're supposed to be concerned about Trump hypothetically listening to information when Democrats weaponize foreign intelligence against their political opponents? Give me a break. So I'll leave you with the closing here. What are they going to say when Attorney General William Barr comes back with findings that the foreign intelligence gathered by the DNC and the Clinton campaign to be used against Trump, including by the FBI, was improperly handled and probably concocted? Probably nothing. What a joke. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government. DailyTorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a great day.